get it going, but it's nothing. It always works out.
Yeah.
Oh God. There we go. I see live now.
I see us live. Okay, sweet. We are
Oh, I see
live.
all your emails.
You do? Oh God.
I'm gonna hack. I let's see some emails. Any Clinton
Hack,
emails
hack,
here?
hack, hack. Yeah. Email from g.soros@gmail. Here's the $5,000 for promoting my agenda.
Dude, it's hilarious. Like speaking of conspiracy emails, I bumped into John Podesta at the gym a couple days ago.
No
It was
way.
yeah, it's a nice guy.
Nice guy. John
Asked him how the pizza
Podesta.
was.
Yeah. Oh my God. Oh my God, dude. What if he said some weird shit and you were like, wait, what? What if he's like,
like like
okay.
Alex Jones is right the whole time.
Yeah. Oh my God. I have to reframe my whole worldview. Um,
Oh God, that would be a vibe.
we need this. Okay. All right. What do you want to do first? How do you want to do this?
I do you have any preferences on starts? I don't. I'm pretty open for all. There's all kind of fun topics. So yeah, fun depending how you define fun. But
Maybe start with Afghanistan, then go to China,
yeah,
and then end it with like Yang Gang and then other shit.
yes, exactly. Yeah, because I did just want to mention ranked choice voting because I think there's some interesting stuff
Oh,
to it.
absolutely. I agree.
Yeah,
I do too.
definitely.
Um,
And then yeah, that sounds yeah. Just go in the
yeah,
order you put it.
and let's
I
not
guess.
and let's be careful not to do, I guess, like too over the top with some of these in-depth ones. Maybe like 20,
Sounds
25
good.
minutes each, so that we're not getting into like hour and a half territory.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Cool,
So
man. Well, we'll still vibing out the length, I guess. Whatever.
see what happens.
All right.
But yeah, I get you for sure.
All right. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. All right. Recording in 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Tonic Accord podcast. I'm your host, Drew, with the other host, Alex, here. We both study political science at Chapman University. We're both working in public policy and politics in various fields, and we like to talk about politics and discuss politics in this podcast. And we try and have a nuanced approach and make sure that we're not, going off of emotion and extremes, whatever that may be. Now, what we're looking at today is the rapid advancement, or what's being reported as the rapid advancement of the Taliban in Afghanistan, coinciding with the United States minimizing its role and effectively pulling out all troops in the area at the same time. Um, just a little bit of context. Donald Trump originally wanted us to be out of Afghanistan by May. That was his kind of goal and deadline. Joe Biden had agreed to continue that strategy, but then moved the deadline of removal of troops in Afghanistan to September 11th of this year. However, he still plans to go along with the Trump administration's idea of moving all our military forces out of Afghanistan. Um, so, Alex, now that we're seeing we're in the middle of this transition and we're seeing the Taliban, they're reporting that they've taken dozens of the districts in Afghanistan, kind of how the country's broken up, and as well as some key border towns. How does this make you feel?
Well, yeah, I mean, over the last, 2 years since we've been doing this podcast, I think we've had a story once or twice a year we've talked about, and it's been completely different. I think a year ago we talked about how, the U.S. brokered a peace talk and a ceasefire with the Taliban. Then, we talked about Trump pulling out, and now here we are again. And to be honest, I'm really torn, man, because on one hand, nothing is changing. U.S. troops are dying. To what end? The Afghani government in Kabul clearly doesn't have enough authority to actually control the country. People are still dying. The Taliban has been slowly gaining momentum for the last couple of years now. So to me, it's like, what are the gains of staying there? But then on the other hand, the Taliban is growing more. They do now know that we have a deadline of when we're trying to get out, so that kind of gives them a ballpark time of how to keep moving and plan for the U.S. being gone, which is always worrying to me. We are seeing girls being massacred in schools in the more rural areas. We are seeing a more repressive approach to women's rights. gay rights, women's education, abortion, all that stuff. And, just to caveat it, I mean, Afghanistan's not a great place for human rights already. But since 2001, it has gotten better. And I'm just worried that things are going to go back. Also, some of our allies can't even get visas or asylum in the United States quickly. And to me, it's a big morale issue, mainly because the U.S. troops that have fought there, they're going to feel like their backs have been turned on.
Yeah.
Afghanis are going to feel like their backs have been turned on, and women's rights are going to go backwards. So honestly, I don't really say yay or nay here. It's too complicated. But to be honest, I actually would go with I think it's too early to pull out.
Hmm. Um, Interesting. Well, yeah, there's a lot of things going on, right? Of course, I think that um, I think it's fair to say that, we quickly ousted, like, we ousted the Taliban from hard power in 2001 relatively quickly, and we tried to have Afghanistan lead to its, like, first elections and everything. And while they were able to do so, it was hardly the democracy that we have in the United States, and not nearly as stable. And again, propped up because of of a U.S. military presence. Um, so I wonder if in its, like, I do see the idea that it's a democracy that's in its infancy and it's so unstable that if the United States pulls out, it's doomed to fail. And that does seem to be the case. However, I don't think that, again, we've been propping up this democracy for 20 years now. I mean, it is 2021, right? So we're coming on 2 decades of attempting to prop up this a faux democracy or whatever, or an attempt at democracy, and it hasn't worked. So while I do fear the future, I do think that whatever we're doing currently is not working. I do think it's worth backing out. I don't think we can solve these issues with the current approach that and the approach we've been doing for 2 decades. It just doesn't make sense to me. Um, that being said, we've made out like we're allies with the Afghanistan government. And I can also see how, like, the leaders of Afghanistan, even when the rhetoric, they met with Joe Biden just recently to address this, like, Taliban insurge, and I can see why they're upset as well. Like, they can feel like they're being, they feel like they've been U.S. allies for 20 years and they're getting their backs turned on them. I even know from some of my, anecdotal, but I have friends in the military that served in Afghanistan, and I've seen them comment and post about how, they feel like they made these allies and they worked with Afghanistan officials to fight the Taliban, and now they have to just, like, leave and hope that their friends are okay, right? Reports are coming out now that the Taliban are pardoning some Afghan military forces, but any of those that gave any intel to the United States or helped directly are not going to be pardoned and are subject to whatever Taliban rule prevails, which I imagine will be harsh and not exactly just. So it's very complicated. It's really hard. I feel like it's like, it's we are giving up, but it's something that I think, like, this is our Vietnam. I think it's something that we have to, I think, swallow a really rough pill. That is, we can't just plant democracy where we want, and whatever we're doing isn't working. And it might get darker before it gets better, but hopefully, like Vietnam, the longer term, it's something that it's a self identity that the country has to have. It's the country on its own has not had its own identity for so long, whether it's been, in Afghanistan's case, Russia and the United States, or in Vietnam's case, China, the United States, and France. They have to kick all these forces out, maybe have some, go through some turmoil on its own, and then eventually come out better. That is what happened with Vietnam. Vietnam is not a communist bloc like we thought it would become. It has embraced the modern world, and it has a growing economy. I hope that that is what happens with Afghanistan, but it has to kind of get darker before the dawn, I think. And I'm not the only person that thinks that. Um, I think here, I forget. Oh, I had it somewhere. An Afghanistan woman. Oh, it was the one on women. It was the one that you posted on women from the Council of Foreign Relations, which I'll let you go into more detail. But the woman that was Afghanistan mentioned that, you know, she worries that it's going to get worse for her country, but that her country needs to stand on its own 2 feet, and the U.S. has not played a part in that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with that, and my the one issue I take with the Vietnam comparison, not specifically to you or anything, is that I feel like Vietnam was more about political ideology, whereas in Afghanistan you have a Taliban that subscribes and follows a very extreme version of Wahhabism,
It's
which
true.
is a very old school fundamentalist sect of Islam.
Yes.
And you also have an Afghani government that isn't particularly, progressive Democrats, but they do believe in elected officials and free and fair elections. And to me, as long as the Taliban is in the country believing what they do, that is not going to happen. So that goes though to the other point is where you said that we've basically been holding up a democracy there. I agree with that. And to me, that's what actually worries me about the future again is because I think the only way to rule in Afghanistan is through a heavy hand because you have so many different sects, so many different regions. It's so rural and there's just so much disconnect between different groups of people in the region in general that I really feel like unfortunately this could push the government in Kabul to be more and more autocratic because like a lot of other countries in the area like I think offhand of like Syria, Iraq, they can't run unless their government has a heavy hand. And that's what I see happening here is really not democracy or even free and fair elections, but more just control. And that's why like I don't think the US whether we stay or not is the problem in that, but it's just the fact that you can't control Afghanistan as one country, and we've seen that time and time again. And I guess at one time maybe you could, because I think of before the Soviet invasion in the late 70s, I want to say, and basically it was a robust, wealthy country with a lot of culture, arts, and educated people. Kabul was a really metropolitan city, but the problem is, just for those who maybe need a refresher, the CIA worked with Pakistan and the ISI to funnel money into Afghanistan, and we propped up a radical group that had a lot of ulterior motives and has then just flourished over the last 50 years practically. And I just don't particularly know how we get rid of that cancer. And like in Vietnam per se, again, I'm just sticking with this because I do think you're right that this is another one of our Vietnams. But to me, it's like I don't see it getting better until the idea of this fundamentalist Wahhabism that the Taliban subscribe to is over. And now on the other thing is that I think on a US perspective, there's really no right or wrong. I feel like this just depends how political scholars and activists and elected officials how they view our role as the military and our role in the world. Because I've heard really smart people say that they don't think we should pull out yet, and I've heard really smart people say we should.
Sure.
And to me, it just kind of depends on what your presence in the region and what you think we should do. But what does scare me is that General Scott Miller, who's the general in charge of removing our troops there, he's basically worried that there's going to be a lost sense of hope and a nihilism that grows out of this amongst the people, where they basically say, well, the U.S. can't back us up. Our Kabuli government is always on the collapse or being threatened by bombs, the Taliban strikes, whatever. And I just worry that the people are going to give up. And when the people give up, there's no insurrection or whatever you want to call it against the Taliban. And maybe the Taliban ends up ruling with an iron fist, because to me, the government in Kabul actually does not have a lot of legitimacy outside of that region. So it's going to be interesting. Yeah.
Well, I just figured that people have given up. I mean, look, it's hard to get it's
Fair.
hard to get an idea on the ground, right? I've never been to Afghanistan. I'm only going off of all these secondary sources and stuff. But the documentaries I've watched, it doesn't seem like the Afghani people are united against the Taliban, or the Afghani government is a one. From what I've seen, the Afghani military without U.S. help seems incompetent,
Yeah.
and ill-equipped. And especially if we back out of help and training, that'll just make maybe worse. I also I like so you're I see what you're saying is yes, that general, this sense of nihilism and defeatism. I mean, I think that is going to happen. I think that is already happening currently. Even the Afghani president had to had to mention it a little, where he's like, yes, there has been some reversals in the fight. So when even when the top guy said there's been some reversals, what that really means is they've gotten slapped around the last few weeks by the Taliban. And so I understand that morale will be low, but I feel like the people have been giving up. I feel like so many Afghanis people are just have been on survival mode for decades now, where it's like, look, Taliban or Afghani or US, I'm gonna do what it takes to just make sure that I live through this bullshit.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, if I can interject for just a second, though, the one interesting thing in that Council on Foreign Relations article about what is next for Afghan women by a lady named Nakhla, I'm probably butchering that, so I
Najla, I think
apologize.
maybe, I don't know.
Najla, yeah, it just depends on how you pronounce that J, and I don't really know. But she basically is now a judge, and she's seen kind of pre-US invasion and post-US invasion.
Mm,
And she does bring up time and time again that when the Northern Alliance, which was basically an anti-Taliban movement of different groups that overthrew the Taliban in 2001 with US help, she basically says that before then, you couldn't leave your house without a male escort, even
right.
if the escort was 4 years old. When it came to dividing property, women counted, 4 women counted as 2 men. So, it just was so unfair. And Human Rights Watch during that time said 87% of Afghan women experienced at least one form of assault, sexual, psychological, whatever it may be. But she said that since like the U.S. and this Northern Alliance, made leeways into at least some form of a central government in Kabul, there are more women at school. There's greater numbers of women in leadership positions, and she herself was able to even study law and work abroad at times, and still work in Afghanistan. So I agree with you. There's definitely nihilism, especially the more outside of the cities you get. I imagine it's still awful. But to me, there was progress, though it was hard to see. And obviously, it was not enough
Well,
progress.
I don't mean. I mean, I talk about what you're talking about is the nihilism now from the Taliban
Right.
resurge as a result of the U.S. backing out. I don't mean there's been nihilism. I,
But I think nihilism and progress can kind of go hand in hand. Like if there's no progress, you're more likely to be
it's
nihilistic.
just how you define progress. But I mean, if
More women going to school for me is progress.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. For me, it is too. Of course, of course. I think we're getting in the weeds on nihilism here, but what
Fair.
I would say that because she also goes to say, I've lived on the Taliban for 5 years. I know what it looks like. You can't breathe. You lose your life to breathe. Everything will be gone. She's pretty nihilistic right now, saying that if the current trends continue, everything will be destroyed. But I don't know. I just like I what okay. Like what, but what do we do? Like what is our solution? Because whatever the hell we've been doing has not been working. We've been fighting the Taliban here and there. Some argue that maybe we haven't given our military the enough agency to do so. That's the one argument I've heard is that we haven't let our military, like we've been
Right.
constricting our military too much and they can't get the job done. The same argument was made in Vietnam. I don't necessarily buy that because of the civilian casualties associated with that kind of aggression. I think just helps the Taliban. I think we've seen that. I think if you look at the rhetoric around what the Taliban uses to recruit, it's almost always about this evil America with its big weapons and tanks and missiles that kill your family from afar. They press a button from the other side of the world and they kill you, and that's helps them recruit. I just I don't see our role in this country to like if we continue our current route like our current role in this country. I just don't see it changing. And while I absolutely acknowledge that there's a difference between when the Taliban had complete control and the Taliban had a third of the country's control, I still just like I don't know, man. Like this country has to get on its own 2 feet on its own, and I've heard that from Afghani people. So I just like I have to imagine that we can't fight this fight for them.
Well, to me also there's a big elephant in the room, and it's Pakistan. Like
True.
kind of talking about what we could do, at least like on a small scale, at least like try to push for some sort of progress. It would be like Imran Khan, the leader of Pakistan, did a great interview with Jonathan Swan of Axios last week that I watched, and he didn't. He also, ignored the Uyghur situation in China, which is a whole other story. He didn't believe it was happening, but he also basically said that he couldn't really condemn the Taliban. He also couldn't acknowledge if the Taliban was working out of northern and western Pakistan, which they are. There's just so much evidence that points to that, and honestly, Imran Khan, under his watch as prime minister, he has allowed the Taliban to flourish inside of rural Pakistan. And we have to remember that the Taliban actually came from Pakistan originally, not Afghanistan.
Sure.
And the Pakistanis have always bolstered them. And he even said that if the U.S. pulls out, he would not be willing to let American intelligence work out of Pakistan, even though they're one of our biggest subsidiaries in the region. Which to me means that okay, if Pakistan is A, going to let the Taliban keep doing what they're doing, or at least turn a blind eye to them, and B, they're not even going to cooperate with us while we give them a lot of money, then let's pull the hell out of Pakistan. Let's make sure that they are not comfortable with their new situation with the U.S. Because clearly Imran Khan, for as fun as he was as a cricket player in his heyday, he is a dick right now. And in terms of like how he's acting with Afghanistan, and he claims that not homophobia, Islamophobia is the biggest issue facing the West and Islam. But in reality, it's some of his policies and his blind eye to what's happening in the country next to him. And so I think looking at Pakistan, again, like it's not something new. Pakistan is what kept Obama and Bush and Clinton up at night. There's reports of that. And I think, again, Pakistan is a big problem. Also, maybe a global treaty that addresses universal rights. That was in that Council on Foreign Relations article
Yeah.
about women in Afghanistan. Maybe more pressure. But again, who cares if the Taliban are running the country? They're not going to listen to a global treaty.
I mean, to a certain point, I mean, it can only get so bad, dude. Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like, if the Taliban takes control, it will get really bad. But like, they'll mess it up. Like, I feel like they're gonna mess up international trade. People will revolt. There will obviously be splinters. I mean, these warlords are gonna get competitive. Like, they're gonna. It's like again, it's almost like I don't know. You have to let these kids. No, that's a terrible analogy, but you have to like let people fail sometimes, so that they can succeed. And then we've been propping Afghanistan up, and millions of people involved, and hundreds of thousands of people have died as a result, and have been displaced or whatever, have their lives forever changed because of this conflict, and it has not led to there's no path to victory. So um we have to change what we're doing now. Biden, again, in his talks with the Afghani president, has said he's committed to aiding the Afghanistan, whatever that means. So it looks like the United States is still open to non-military based aid to Afghanistan, whether that's diplomatic or financial. I don't know. They talked about that behind closed doors. Um, but at least on paper or on this speech, Biden has said he's agreed to, he's committed to viewing Afghanistan as an ally and aiding their government, just not in the same military capacity as we have before. On what you said about Pakistan is very true. You bring up an absolutely good point that all of these groups, and Taliban especially, are not like alone in their own little vacuums. They're often funded by larger Islamist states, Pakistan included, for this one. And yeah, man, dude, if that's the case, like if Imran Khan is like not down to help us out at all, or not even recognizing the Uyghur situation, like what a douche. I mean, let's not forget they were the ones that supposedly had no idea Osama bin Laden was chilling in Pakistan for years. Like, yeah,
Hmm.
right. They knew the whole freaking time. So no, they are not our friends. That's a really good point you bring up. Um, but yeah, I just wanted to mention that the United States is actually looking at ways to help Afghanistan outside of military intervention, and I just don't know what that is specifically yet. So I'm interested to see what Biden does come up with on how to maintain our alliance with the current Afghanistan government. And let's not, again, while we're seeing these reports come in, like including one where I think the Taliban took out a city on the border of Turkmenistan. Um, so that, like, having a border capability, the ability to tax trade and coming in and out and stop people from entering the border of Afghanistan is a big strategic thing. So that's a big thing for the Taliban. But that being said, is some of the reports of how quickly they're taking the country are disputed. The UN disputes some of these reports, the United States disputes some of these reports, and of course the Afghan military itself disputes many of the reports. So we don't have a full picture of what's going on. It's not like the Taliban has taken over the whole country already. That's not what's happening. But they're just taking districts at an increasing speed that is worrisome to the global community. That's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's going to be something we're going to have to see for sure. But part of me almost feels like neighboring countries, especially places like Pakistan and Turkmenistan, may be okay with what the Taliban are doing because sometimes being more anti-imperialism and anti-American power
Sure.
is more important than being anti-Taliban, and I think that's what we're seeing in some parts. I also, on the domestic side, I do. It's going to be interesting. Like Gallup had a poll out just yesterday, I think it was, that I saw that 40% of Americans believe that the military effort is a mistake in general, but that leaves 60%, which are kind of in different vagaries around it. So I'm actually kind of curious to see how this could either help Biden or backfire, depending how it works. Like obviously Trump kind of planted the seed of pulling out,
Yeah.
but obviously Biden is going to be under his watch, and I'm curious, like if this ends well, will it help Biden or will it hurt him? So yeah.
Definitely. And shout out to this article that you found and we both read. This Council for Relation one, definitely worth a read for those out there, from Najla Ayubi. Uh, Her story is incredible and pretty fascinating. So super super fast. And again, and this also quickly reminded me just a little bit about where we talked a little bit about critical race theory as just a lens in which to view an issue. This and again, and how we have to use multiple lenses, right? And different lenses offer different angles and perspectives that can be valuable in one way or another. This is a great one. Like this is almost viewing the conflict in Afghanistan through a feminist lens. What does this mean
Right.
for women, right? This is and it's not the only lens we want to view this issue in. We obviously want to view Afghanistan through a geopolitical lens that leads us to the conflicts with Russia and the United States and Pakistan's geopolitical conflicts, right? So that's one lens. This is a great feminist lens to look at this issue. Talks about women's rights and how Afghanistan is ranked as the second worst place to live to be a woman in, next to Yemen. So anyway, another just quick reminder that it's important to have these lenses, and they offer different angles, and it doesn't mean it's the only way to look at something, but they offer value, and this is a great one, so shout out to that. Okay.
Yeah.
Should we head on to the next one? So we talked a little bit about Afghanistan.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is a topic that's in the news, but we want to shift over to something that maybe you haven't so much thought about, and it's been kind of creeping into the news over the last few years. So, Alex, take it away. What is our next topic, and give us the lowdown?
So, hello everyone. Welcome back to the Tonic Accord podcast. Alex Kapitko with my friend and co-host Drew Nepley. We both work in some form of politics, public policy. We both love to talk politics. We went to Chapman University together. And today, Drew, the Chinese Communist Party has turned 100. And to be honest, I was thinking about this. I read a good article about this, and it seems like the Chinese Communist Party, or the CCP, has done everything that Soviet Russia wished they could do. When the Soviet Union imploded in 91, everyone else thought other communist style regimes were going to fall around the world as well. But now, even the G7 summit, 2 weeks ago, President Biden worried that democracies just can't keep up with China. And it looks to me like we're going to have a fascinating 21st century with China growing until they maybe stagnate. But today, I think it's a good idea to talk about kind of the Communist Party, after 100 years, but also some other interesting issues. And the one I kind of wanted to maybe focus on is Hollywood and censorship. And it kind of came back into the light with me because in late May, a guy who I think is hilarious and just awesome, John Cena, who's in the new Fast and Furious movie. I think it's 9. To be honest, I don't really know. I haven't seen him since like the second one. But I think it's the 9th one, and he's in that one. And he basically had a comment where he mentioned that Taiwan is a country. And there was a whirlwind of criticism and anger towards him, especially from the Chinese Communist Party. And it was actually really sad and almost cringe-worthy, to see John Cena's apology, where he full-heartedly just bowed down and kowtowed to the Chinese Communist Party. And then it came out that Fast and Furious 9 is opening in China before the U.S., and parts of it are being filmed in China. And while Americans and theaters have been locked down, the Chinese people are going to movies, and they're the second biggest market in the world. And so we are seeing this time and time again, that American studios are having to censor ideas that the Chinese Communist Party doesn't like and the Chinese country doesn't like. And I think it's going to get kind of interesting down the road because, like we talked about last week with Apple in China, I think Apple thought that they could change China, right? And instead, it looks like China's changing us. And now we're having American companies censor ideas because a foreign country doesn't like them. So, Drew, like, what do you think about this? Is it a big deal or just clickbaity news?
No, it's absolutely a big deal. And it's you know, it's always worrisome when a large superpower can have a cultural and political influence on other countries. Now the irony is the United States has done this for a while, but I'll go very different reasons, very different nuance. I'll talk more about that later. But primarily, yes, it of course worries me that the Chinese government has such a say in American media and entertainment. And I don't think people realize that. So, one is you mentioned this, which is John Cena didn't want to piss off China, had mentioned something about Taiwan, needed to come back out and say, I'm sorry, I wrongly said Taiwan is a country because they want that Fast Nine opening in China. And that's the thing is China. One, there's a couple angles to this. One is China, its middle class, was 20 million people, before 2000, and it's now close to 800 million people. A massive, massive increase in the middle class. So much so that that's led to people having disposable income, right? Though China is not a free economy, it is a way more market-based economy than it was under the Great Cultural Revolution or whatever, under the Mao era. And so because of that, people have money, people buy iPhones, people go to movies, right? They live a normal life that an American could expect just without free speech. And a lot of other things. But for the sake of this argument, you have this massive middle class that's recently come into some disposable income that is now consuming American entertainment. So much so that the Chinese film market can be now more lucrative than the U.S. market, where films like Fast and Furious, not the new one, but the previous one, Transformers and Avengers, all made more money in China than they did in the United States. So it is huge, huge money to have your film open in China. Now, the Chinese government only allows 38 foreign films to screen in Chinese theaters. So you have to vie for that spot. If you want to have your movie be in China, you have to vie for that spot. And to compete for that spot that China lets your film have, you have to abide by Chinese rules. It includes anything from you can't have any Chinese people be portrayed in a negative light, which is very, very broad and vague. So in movies like Pirates of the Caribbean, they took out a whole scene where a Chinese person was a pirate. You weren't allowed to portray Chinese people as pirates because they're criminals. So they took the whole scene out, and then it got released in China. You can't do things where and then you also do good things, right, to make it so that China wants to have your film. So I guess I watched a great analysis of why Transformers Extinction Age, or I can't follow these stupid movies, but one of the Transformers films was one of the most egregious examples of sucking up to the Chinese party, where they filmed a lot in China, they did deals with Chinese companies for product placement. But then they also portrayed Chinese government officials as highly competent, very structured and organized, and they saved the day multiple times. And Mark Wahlberg pats him on the back and thanks him for thanks for helping save the day to the Chinese officials. Right? Very just oh my God, Jesus Christ. Very obvious, baiting the propaganda. And then, they got approved to release in China, and they made $1 billion. So there's incentive to adhere to the Chinese government's policies, and there's also competition because of they literally limit the amount of foreign films that they let in their theaters.
Yeah, that's a really good point you brought up there, is because I read a pretty scathing article from the Heritage Foundation, which, caveats aside, they're quite right wing, and I actually don't agree with their solution for this, but they also mentioned that is that there's a quota system which kind of makes everyone kind of jumping over each other to get those spots.
Yes.
And then, once you get maybe one of those spots, then also you have to be able to play in China, which means that even before you start filming, sometimes you even have to submit a script to Chinese censors.
Right.
And you mentioned the Transformers movies, which yeah, I'm glad you said that, man, because I don't even know which Transformers movies are out there anymore. Like all those movies to me have just become one just bullshit thing I haven't watched. But
Yeah,
um
pretty much.
but basically like a couple examples just for our listeners here is that movie 2012, which was atrocious by the way. Humanity is saved because the Chinese government basically builds life-saving arcs. I read that that was kind of changed down the road. In Gravity, Oscar winner with Sandra Bullock, she survives by getting herself to a Chinese space station.
Right.
And in Mission Impossible, I think it was the newest one in Shanghai, where basically they had to film a fake street in Shanghai because they didn't want to show the homeless or the drugs or the trash on the streets. And then, of course, to me, the most telling one was in Doctor Strange, which I
Right.
thought was a great movie, where the monk lady, whose name I'm totally spacing on, basically she was supposed to be Tibetan, and they changed her to a Celtic lady because obviously, as you and I've talked about before, the Chinese do not like to talk about Tibet and the Dalai Lama and Buddhism in Tibet. And to me, it's like the issue here is that I'm fine if you want to paint a rosy picture of a country. We do it all the time. Like you said, we have put propaganda into our movies. It's nothing new. It's definitely nothing new. And but my thing is that basically China wants to be just treated like a good actor and shown that they're like a good actor around the world. Like they want their viewers to view them as a Germany or a France or a UK or whatever, like just some peaceful country who there's a lot of movies about, and so that goes like to where I worry about it though is that I feel like kids, especially kids that I know, like when I was teaching in Spain and I lived with a family, the kid watched mainly Avengers and Marvel movies, and I worry that he's going to grow up having a more favorable view of China based on what he's seen on TV, and it's not really describing the reality on the ground. And a gentleman named Mike Gonzalez, who was part of this 94-page paper that warned about this, I think it was about 5 years ago. He's a senior fellow at the Davis Institute for National Security. He says that, in quotes here, American audiences are being submitted to censorship, not their own censorship, but a foreign power's censorship, and a communist party censorship. People get shown a very benign view of China, in which China is a normal country, no different from Paris or Britain or Germany. And to me, that's the issue is we're just bolstering China's might. It was the same with the NBA when the Houston Rockets GM tweeted against China about Hong Kong,
Yeah.
and LeBron, much like John Cena, had to basically cry in front of the cameras to apologize. And it's like I think this will backfire though, man. And I'm curious your opinion on this because right now, obviously, we're trying to appeal to this giant market, and I think you brought up a very good point, and it's a crucial point, is that there's more people in China seeing these movies. China's middle class, like that's probably why the CCP hasn't collapsed, is because their middle class is growing, but their middle class has grown just exponentially. And yeah, that's right now good for Hollywood. But what happens when Americans stop seeing the movies? And what happens when there is a backlash against some of these companies because it's lies and Americans see it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, yes, I think that what should happen is there should be public pressure against American businesses, companies, institutions, whatever, to not kowtow to China. I mean, like whether you're coming at it from like I don't think it's like I don't even think it's not even a partisan thing in my opinion, right? It's not even like
Mm.
a right wing, left wing thing. Like this, we should just absolutely not have our media be influenced by the Chinese government. Like why would anyone be for that? The only reason is economic. I mean, greed, right? Greed, the idea that, and I want to make a key distinction because you know I mentioned a little bit about like product placement. That's not necessarily that bad, right?
No.
If a Chinese company wants to promote a Chinese soda, or an American company does it, they do it all the time in the Transformers movies. Big GMC logo right in your freaking face for two seconds before the scene starts. Right? That's whatever. I mean, that's just business. That's marketing. Studios can make the decision to field. Whatever. That's between them. And then even on the propaganda side, even that argument, like yeah, like we have to realize that the United States does this too, but we don't ban anyone from filming. So yes, the United States government does give billions, and that's B with a billion, billions with a B, to the film industry to make the United States military look cool. Top Gun, the biggest example, the first Top Gun movie and the new one, Top Gun Maverick, have funding from the U.S. military, from the U.S. Air Force, to make the jets look sick, to make, it's all about making it be really cool to be in the Air Force, right? Even in the gaming industry, which is something I'm an avid gamer. There was even a whole video game that was funded completely by the American military called America's Army, and it was designed to get kids familiar with the America's military and to recruit them into the United States military, and also to make a fun game. Call of Duty gets tons of money to promote and advertise right alongside the U.S. military. However, the difference is the United States does not block or ban anyone from filming. The United States does
Right.
not have a litany of requirements for you to be a film studio. The United States does not limit there's no approval system to get your film in theaters. It's just, can you get a production studio to pay for it, right? Can you just go through the normal process? And so that's the key difference is, yes, while we engage in funding what may be soft propaganda in the film industry, and people should be aware of that, I don't see it as this cardinal sin as what China's doing, which is China is very deliberately banning things. Like, you can't, like the fact that you can't even portray a Chinese person in a negative light. I mean, like, what? That's also a funny thing. There's also a side, for C and D list American actors, there's this now, like, if you kind of lose sizzle, like you sizzle out and you lose steam in the States in Hollywood, you can get a good career playing bad guys in China because of that rule, because they need foreigners to play villains because they don't want to portray a Chinese person as a villain. So all the heroes are Chinese, but though you can make a good living being a white American dude playing villains in every movie in China. Isn't that funny?
well, well, that's kind of funny because that I mean, it's a horrible comparison, but that reminds me of how like La Liga and Premier League soccer players end up playing in the MLS in the US. It's like, okay, your career's over. Like, let's just put you in here as that figurehead of something else. Blah blah blah. But
right.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, man. And I think that is the key difference. Is yes, the U.S. does put out propaganda movies. Like half of the military movies we put out make the U.S. Army look like a globetrotting force, which in ways they are. But again, it's not limiting everyone from doing it. And like, to me, that's when we're gonna need to see companies have a backbone.
Yes.
Like, obviously profits are important, especially if you're the CFO of, I don't know, Warner Brothers or something. Like, obviously that's important, but where's the line? Like, what happens if the quality, your reputation, and your legacy are now being destroyed because you're making a movie that is fine-tuned for the CCP? And obviously profits are good, but I think there's more than that. And unfortunately, the structure of our just corporate world in general is not in that direction, and it does piss me off. Now, unfortunately, I've seen Republicans, especially because, as we know, they're more hawkish on China right now. They don't have a lot of good solutions for this because Ted Cruz, for example, he wants to use the Defense Department basically to use like special authority to basically ban the Chinese government from being involved in Hollywood. And to me, that seems like an overreach. And also just like, again, what is antithetical to Republicans using the big government to cut these programs out to force others to do something in their bidding. I don't think that's the right way because we could see like, a kind of a snowball effect down the road of what happens. But I do think that these US companies need to maybe get away from the pressure of listening to the Chinese government and not looking at their margins. The other thing I'm just curious what you think about this is there's this guy, Matthew Iglesias, he was one of the co-founders of Vox. He actually wrote a really interesting book that he talked about on Joe Rogan a while back. And it's called 1 Billion Americans. And it basically, it's his argument for, I guess, allowing a huge surplus of new immigrants and building up our population. Because he feels that the U.S. is losing to China due to a numbers game. And that's what you mentioned earlier, right? Is like, we're afraid to stand up to them because we make money from China. And so he argues that through immigration and allowing just our country's population to get up, we would benefit from a large population because we would have the economic and democratic freedom to stand up to China because we won't have to cede the future of numbers to China. And I'm butchering this like a little bit, but he just thinks that global cooperation is good, but also global competition is good.
Yeah.
And right now, no one can compete with China because of their just numbers. So it's an interesting case that he outlines in his book about the case for immigration into the U.S. because a billion Americans could actually, at least compete with a billion Chinese.
Yeah, I love that topic. That's a super fascinating idea. I think we should maybe even do a whole other podcast about it
Absolutely.
no, I hear that. I mean, that's pretty common, especially amongst like the progressive left among immigration, or like those that are want not nearly strict borders, is the idea that look, like one argument I hear all the time is that exact thing is actually living in an influx of people, contrary to what some might think on Fox News, would lead to economic boom. It would lead to an economic progress. It literally means more people bringing more resources and skills and trade into the economy. There's also pretty good arguments. There's decent arguments against that. So I'm not. Let's not
Yeah.
get into the weeds on that here. But that's a valid.
Yeah.
It's an interesting point, though, is that yes, like the, China does outnumber us, and because of that, their market now that we are seeing that tip where people are making more money in China than outside of it, or at least more money in China than the U.S. market. Yeah, it obviously like I don't necessarily I don't necessarily fault these businesses for wanting to be in the Chinese market and to appeal to broader audiences outside the US. It is a fact of the world now that the people that watch movies are not just Americans, right? And there's literally billions of people out there that are not Americans, that have different cultures that you can appeal to in your films now, that can make sure your film have success across the world. That there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong. I still don't even think there's necessarily wrong with product placement. That's between you and a studio. But what I think should happen, and is that we public pressure. There was public because we see it work. We see it work with Pride, right? We see Pride being adopted by companies across the U.S. everywhere. Again, we've even talked about to a point where almost annoyingly so, even among people in the community think it's annoying. But still, overall, I would say that from having no recognition to having so much recognition in corporate America is a success. We've seen public pressure push tons of companies into supporting Black Lives Matter and equality and justice. Formula One for the first time talked about race ever, right? So public pressure absolutely does work on big companies, and I think it can in the case of China. I really do think it can. I think there will be a tipping point where companies are like, at what point is it like there's so many people upset with us, we have to stop? One good example that or one maybe a decent example to look at is, again, back to the gaming, is Blizzard. Blizzard is the entertainment, is a
Yeah.
American-based video game company that makes games like World of Warcraft, Overwatch, Hearthstone, a bunch of very popular computer games. That have huge professional like teams and stuff. One of which is called Hearthstone. There is a massive Hearthstone event. One of the big players named was Blitzchung, a popular Hearthstone player, and he talked about free Hong Kong in an interview. And Blizzard, banned him outright from the sport completely, or the game, from the esport completely, and as well banned the journalists that were just interviewing about the game that weren't even talking about Hong Kong. Um, and so it caused a huge reaction in the gaming community about this censorship and how, Blizzard wanted the access to Chinese market. And since then, the Hearthstone professional gaming scene has completely died out and the game has gone bunk. And so much so that Blizzard has decided to not continue hosting events for that game. Now, there's a good argument that Hearthstone on its own just sucked. People, it didn't compare to its competitors and it died out naturally. But I have to say that it did also seem like this was the final nail in the coffin, where people were already upset with the state of that particular game. And then on top of that, this whole scenario where Blizzard just sucked the toes of the Chinese government and banned one of the most popular players. Not a suspension, right? Because their argument was, well, we don't allow anyone to talk politics at these gaming events. That's fair, but you should have then suspended him for a day or maybe give him a slap on the wrist. But they outright banned his ass, and they banned the reporters that were interviewing him that didn't even ask the question about Hong Kong. So they obviously went really hard with the gavel, and to the point where people were like, "Screw this, man! This country is just bowing down to the Chinese," and it really tarnished that company's reputation. It tarnished that whole games professional scene to the point where that particular game is pretty much dead.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, so all that to say is public opinion on this stuff does matter, and I think it can lead to change, and I hope it does.
yeah, no, good, very interesting point. I did not know that. I'd heard about kind of the Blizzard controversy and some of that stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting, and it definitely could work. Also, I did read that streaming services might be another kind of roundabout way to deal with this issue because Netflix, for example, is not allowed in mainland China, especially the
Right.
programs that are mainly put out in the West. So you can make a documentary on the Uyghur situation in China, and the Chinese government's not going to stand up to it because they might not even know it's being made until it's too late.
Right.
Streaming services are a good way for people to get information through documentaries and shows.
Good point.
I mean, there are alternatives, for our listeners out there. It's not like China's just eating up the market. Nomadland was made by a Chinese director who is not popular with the Chinese government. It won some Oscars. She got Best Director. It's kind of a criticism of a world economy that arguably China contributed to, and it still did well. So yeah, I mean, there's still room. I just hope that people become more aware of it and companies maybe get more of a backbone to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, everyone should be aware of government's influence in the media and entertainment we consume, and it's there. But absolutely no one should get away with banning art. It's crazy to me that China's gotten away with their limits on free speech for so long. I think I even saw that they defined it because they were someone was talking about. I think it was the NBA. It was that NBA guy's tweets, and China said that anything that disrupts the I think it was the
It was harmony, right?
it was the harmony of society and the national sovereignty of China is not under the bounds or is not under the umbrella of free speech. So anything that anything that affects harmony is not under the bounds of free speech. So if I cuss too loud because I stubbed my toe in China and it affects the harmony of my neighbors, so I mean that's what I mean. So it's ridiculous arguments. It's crazy that China has had this long of this crazy of a hand in its speech in its country. I hope it changes, but yeah, definitely pressure film studios. Tweet about it. You know what I mean? If you hear that your favorite fantasy series or whatever is now changing some of the characters because of Chinese censorship, call them out because that's stupid.
Absolutely, absolutely. I totally agree, and hopefully things will change, man. But yeah, clearly in China, harmony is more important than individual rights.
Yes,
That's definitely
harmony,
happening.
quote unquote.
Yeah, exactly. So before we're out of here, New York City had kind of an interesting primary
It
for
did.
like two reasons. Andrew Yang did horrible and already dropped out, and we saw ranked choice voting kind of in fruition. So I don't know if you want to because you shared some articles, and I think you said you were even working a little bit in this New York City primary. So what do you think of this primary, man? Eric Adams is right now leading. He's a controversial character, and in my opinion, probably the worst one.
Yeah. Yeah, so I can't exactly disclose what I'm doing in the
Right.
New York primary, but
Absolutely.
I do work in political media and political and part of that includes political intelligence. So I've been keeping track of the spending some of these candidates have been doing for that primary. But outside of that, I mean, I'm in LA. We're not in New York. But it's important to keep this race under check because anyone that becomes a New York mayor. Um, kind of has America's mayor's title, and as well as obviously, New York City is so large and so vast and requires such a certain type of governance that if you're the mayor of New York City, you're immediately on the upper echelon of the political field, right? You're now immediately recognizable name. You can now go for governorships. You can become a senator, or you can run for president, right? It's definitely different than being the mayor of Cleveland, right? Like, could you and I name the mayor of Cleveland? No, hell no.
No.
I bet you half the people in Cleveland couldn't name the mayor of Cleveland. Whereas the mayor of New York, I think, has a much larger stamp on American politics and the culture around it. So, with that said, a lot of people are following this race. And then one thing is that you mentioned is it has ranked choice voting. This is something being put into practice in a few instances. I think it happened in San Francisco. It's happening now in New York, but it's not the usual way we do it in America. So what they're doing is instead of just you vote for one in a primary and whoever wins the most takes it. Now it is, you can vote based on ranked. I think it was up to 12 or 13. So quite a few ranks you can put, I think.
In this one, it was only 5, I
Oh,
think.
5. Okay, so I think there's 13 candidates total, but you can put 5. Got it. Okay, my bad. So you can put your 5. So I could put Yang first, Garcia second, Adams third, and so what happens is, if someone wins the majority over 50% of the first round, then they've won. But after that, everything past that, if it's pluralities, then it takes the ranked choice voting. You start eliminating the bottom and then going by those people's second choices, and so you start accumulating votes. And in fact, I actually there was a really good infographic right here. This is a great infographic. So you can see here, the votes go here, and then as people start getting eliminated, the second and third choices start bolstering these other candidates. So we're watching here, Yang still around, Yang goes out, Garcia and Wiley goes out. So now we're down to Garcia and Adams, and we're in round 11. And now our numbers are here. And by the way, Garcia has come back quite a bit very recently, and we'll talk about it in a bit. So ranked choice voting has happened. It's a new style, and it's an interesting style. People on the right and the left are proponents of this. Some of the reasons people are proponents, this guy in the Hill describes it as it discourages negative campaigning, because you want to make sure that if you're not first on someone, you want to be second. You don't want to, let's say I'm a Garcia fan, and Andrew Yang wants me to put him second. He should not attack Garcia a ton, because maybe I then don't want to put Yang second. So if you kind of follow where I'm going, you kind of want to be buddy-buddy with some people, unless it's the front runner, maybe. And then their argument is it also promotes more centrist candidates, because you can, let's say you're less likely to have to be forced into an extreme candidate versus the boring guy because of ranked choice voting. So yeah, I think it's fascinating, and I think it's super cool, and it has produced a pretty centrist candidate. So I don't know, what's your analysis of what happened?
Yeah, I mean, I actually am not the biggest fan of ranked choice voting. First off, I think in theory, I mean, no, you summed it up perfectly. And I think in theory it is true that it leads to, more cooperation between candidates, instead of this vitriolic thing that we've seen more and more over the last decade. And, for example, Yang and Garcia actually campaigned together towards the end. So now that's probably why, in my opinion, she might be now jumping up, is because there's probably a lot of shared votes between her and Yang. And now that he's dropped out,
gets him.
Exactly. Now my problem with it is that I read a really good piece. Let me pull up the name of the article. It's called the Democracy Journal, and it's coined as the Journal of Ideas. But they in 2016, I want to say it was, they put out an article that talks about how ranked choice voting ensures that no fringe candidate can win, like you mentioned, right? Like a Donald Trump arguably would not win in ranked choice voting, because he won with a majority of voters, but enough of a majority that was more than other minorities, not majorities. He won with enough of a minority that he won over Hillary Clinton, arguably. Now, let's not go down that rabbit hole, but you know what I mean? Like, you're not going to have a crazy hardcore partisan. And so, but this Democracy Journal argues that there's actually an issue with exhaustion that comes out of this process, is because basically you are required to choose, whatever it is, 5 or 8 candidates. And this has happened because Australia and the United States both do this. They're the only countries I could find that have tried this out. And so this Democracy Journal uses this example. Say there are 5 candidates, like this New York City primary, that you can vote for. Yet the voter ranks only 3 of them. And this actually happened quite frequently in San Francisco. In San Francisco, 10% of voters did not actually list 5 candidates. They only listed 3 because of just exhaustion. They're like, screw it. Like, one of these people maybe. And so the problem is, some of these people they listed never even made it past the first round or got eliminated right away. And then there were not 2 to 5 other options. So it just kind of led to their first choice one, which could be good in theory. It also might not be. But basically, this article found that in San Francisco, close to 10% were exhausted just through voting and did not actually put down 5 people. And in Australia, up to 30% in the first round of a congressional election didn't even put down all 5 people possible. And so then the other thing is that they found the majorities might not be convincing. In 2010, the Australian Labor Party won the House with 38% of first place votes on the ballot, while the second place Liberal National Coalition had 43%. So it was an interesting, and I'll be honest, I don't exactly know how the Australian politics work in this, but basically a party that won 38% of the first place vote beat the second place, which had 43% of the vote. Again, I don't know how that happened, but it to me doesn't make sense on paper, right? And so to me, Eric Adams, yes, like putting it back to this election, Eric Adams is the most like centrist candidate, ex-Republican, kind of used his own version of identity politics in a way, kind of fired up, but he was also like hard on law and order, right?
Yeah, he's
But
an
to me,
ex NYPD.
yes, exactly. But he also is like kind of nuts. Like arguably, I've seen reports he doesn't live in New York. He lives in Jersey. He's staying at his son's apartment in New York. He's said some weird things over the years. Basically, you can't criticize him. Like there's news press conferences where he says, "Are you racist?" every time people try to criticize him. I think he's the worst case possible candidate, and so he is the centrist. But in a world where we need solutions and pragmatism and like things getting done, I almost feel like he might be the worst guy. He's just this kind of quirky guy who's divisive. But
Yeah,
rant aside, yeah,
I don't think he's a very good candidate. However, it makes sense that in with the increase in crime, which has happened in New
yeah,
York, that someone who's more, protection, NYPD oriented, would do well. Yang only had the name recognition at the beginning, and then said some weird stuff, and then it's kind of a quirky guy. And I think people got out of it. Your point about fatigue toe is interesting because it's absolutely worth bringing up. Um, but I don't see it as a problem worse than the ones we have in the current system, right?
that's
So,
fair.
so like, yeah, I see what you mean about five. Maybe you do only four, or maybe even only three, right? Or you limit the amount of rounds. Like you can adjust the. And I don't know what the hell happened with that Australia thing with I mean, whatever they're doing over there is not correct. I don't know what that is. Maybe I have to look into that further. You certainly should not have it set up so that someone wins who has less votes. That's not how it's supposed to work. But I do think it's worth doing ranked choice voting because this, I think so many times, man, we come across so many elections where so many people feel. I mean, Joe Biden versus Trump, Hillary Clinton versus Trump was just like, how did we get to these people on both sides? Like, how is this the best we could come up with? And so many people feel that way that I feel like ranked choice gets us a little bit closer. But that being said, I don't think it's a panacea, right? I don't think we'll never have a radical candidate. And frankly, I think, you know, I don't know. Who knows what could have happened, but someone like Trump still could have maybe pulled it out, even with ranked choice, because of his rhetoric and how many people he can whip up, right? So it's not like always going to work to the most centrist candidate, but I just think it offers people more agency and more variety in the way they vote. They can think about things, I think, a little bit deeper than they normally do. Now, will people do that? It's hard to say, right? It's almost like you want to lead the horse to the water, but can you make it drink? I don't know. A good example is the people that don't put all the names they need to. I mean, what can you do with that? Some people just don't give a shit about politics, but I still think that problem to me is not great enough to prevent me from trying ranked voting because I think it solves other problems.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I think we can both agree that it would probably take away some of the divisive, like cutthroat nature of elections.
Yeah,
And I do just like I do worry too. I mean, we saw what happened just with mail-in voting in the 2020 election, where there was even a couple days where Trump was able to sow chaos, waiting just for Biden to be announced as the winner. And I mean, there's some
true.
people who think we won't even know these results until early July or even
Yes. It
mid-July.
does mean
Like
longer elections. You're very right.
and like where we're going right now. I feel like if you had a demagogue who could be losing and gets desperate, there's a lot of time to sow confusion, and so like maybe the solve all with that or to that would be maybe speed up this process or find a way to get these results quicker.
Sure,
Um,
sure. Absolutely. I mean, always that. But I mean, and look, man, I don't think we should slow progress down for the dumbest rock. Like, do you know what I
no,
mean? Like,
no, you're
if
right.
this is a better way to do elections, I don't think we should avoid it just because some idiots that or were convinced by the My Pillow guy don't understand it. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, okay, well, you don't understand it. Real people in reality do, and this is a better way to do elections sometimes. I don't.
Absolutely.
So I see what you're saying, though. I mean, there's certainly that.
I mean, it did lead to tangible violence, though.
No, no, you're right. You're right. It's not to be ignored. You're certainly right that it would mean longer elections, but it would mean so we have to educate people on why these elections would be more representative in the long run. Not everyone's going to get convinced of that. That's okay. That's okay. But I don't think we should
Yeah.
not. We should definitely not do policy out of the worry that some people might be too stupid to understand it.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to say one thing about like Yang real quick is
Sure.
that like I did a catching up a month ago where I kind of saw him as a shoe-in. And to me in the 2020 election, he was this kind of shiny new object who was weird and quirky, but he was also bold and controversial. And people felt like he was talking to them and being genuine. And I mean, arguably UBI has done pretty well for him in the last year, especially with COVID. Like the conversation's changed.
Yeah.
But I feel like the issue is that I was reading yesterday in the New York Times that he hired the consulting class that worked with Bloomberg. He
Jesus,
tried to
what?
rely to like he lost that appeal because he became somewhere in the process a typical New York establishment politician who came off as out of touch. He said cringy things about the Asian community. He's like, I'm Asian, I know doctors. It's like, all right, man,
Uh,
like stay away from the identity stuff, man. Like
yeah, for
people
real.
liked you because you're like a quirky, cool guy who's rich but also fun. Like stick with that. And I feel like he lost his appeal. And at the same time, like I don't like Eric Adams. I think he's kind of brought out some of the worst of like almost both sides in a weird way. But he does, I think, show that Democrats maybe need to take crime more seriously
Yes.
because like all the progressives did not do well in this election. It was the centrist who's a little bit quirky but hardcore on crime, and Biden's already said that they're going to focus on this in Maryland and other parts, and I think that's accurate.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I think the progressives lose a lot of people when it comes to crime because while I 100% agree with the progressive left on reforming police departments and all that, reformative justice and everything, we also are seeing a massive crime wave, and we do need policing. I'm not out here saying defund the police. So you're absolutely right. The progressives lost New York when they can't address crime, and so very astute point. Yang, you're absolutely right. Just too cringy, man. Too weird. But brought up good conversations. Yeah. So but all this to say is, so keep an eye out on this election. Also, Garcia is getting a lot of these second, third ranked choice votes, so she is catching up rapidly. So Adams is not a shoe-in anymore. It really could go either way, and there's I still think 120,000 absentee ballots still out, so we don't know the winner yet. It's kind of exciting. And then yeah, dude, I've worked with Bloomberg's like media agencies back in 2020. Through my company, and they suck, man. They really don't know what they're doing. So the fact that's not surprising. Like Yang hired Bloomberg's consultants and stuff. Probably has got some of the same media advice. It's not good. They're not good.
No.
So you can see the results. Yeah, pretty wild. So to wrap this up, though, quick hot take. John McAfee,
Oh yes, thank God.
suicide or not, Epstein or not.
Okay. Okay. I was actually talking to my buddy last night. We actually had a pretty long FaceTime, and this actually came up. Like putting on your tinfoil hat. No one condemned me for this. I do think that it's likely he killed himself, but he had a quote that said, "If you find Epstein hanging, I'll be next." He also, his wife and his lawyer and him said, "If I'm found dead by suicide, it wasn't suicide. I'll release all my documents." Weirdly enough, there are conspiratorial reports that say that condo in Florida. He actually owned a condo in that Florida, and his death and that collapse were within a couple days. People say that the
What? Wait,
documents he
someone said
wanted
he
to.
owned one of the condos
Yes,
in Florida?
yes, yes,
What?
yes.
What?
Yes, and apparently, if that's true, that's also where he had all the files and the computers that would have released damning information.
I don't know, man. That's fun. Like that's a fun conspiracy. No, I mean not fun. Obviously, it's a super terrible tragedy what happened in Florida, but that's an interesting conspiracy to think about. But I don't
He
know,
also there's a video in Catalonia where they basically say he left a suicide note. Like the Spanish authorities say, yeah, there was a suicide note. There's a picture of some sort of paper, and then it was never found or read. Weird stuff, man. I don't know.
Mm.
But obviously, this guy like was in Belize. Pretty much had a compound where he enforced curfews. He got super paranoid. He killed one of his neighbors allegedly
Allegedly.
over them. And like obviously, there's people that hated this guy. So like it would not surprise me if he was killed. But and also he was being extradited to the U.S. when he was found dead in this Catalonian jail cell. I don't know, man. What do you think?
I have no clue, dude. I could, cause like the thing about like if they find me dead, it wasn't suicide. Like that's always super sketch. But I watched like I mean, it wasn't no BBC. It was like a YouTube documentary, right? So let's just caveat that I have no freaking clue if any of what I saw was true. But I watched this YouTube, like a mini YouTube documentary about him and about like that stuff with the neighbor, how he thought he was being like he thought because like his neighbor got shot in Belize, and no one knows who did it, and they all thought it was John McAfee, but then he got cleared. But then he like went on the run, like he was on the run in
Mhm.
his mind from the Belizean authorities or whatever, but he wasn't. Like he like thought he was gonna get caught, so he like escapes to Honduras or something, and then they caught him there without like a visa. And they're like, "Hey man, like you're here illegally, like you need to get like a travel visa or something." And he's like, "You're gonna extradite me to Belize? I'm fucked. I'm fucked." And then like Belize authorities were like, "No, we don't want him. Like we're not. There's no warrant for his arrest at all. He's fine. I don't know what he's doing over there." And so he didn't like. So like he thought he was getting chased when he wasn't. So I think like from what I understand, this guy was kind of paranoid and
Yeah.
crazy. Um, but the circumstances around his death are pretty weird. His I don't know if it's wife or girlfriend. I think his wife. He has a wife that says that she believes he was murdered. He doesn't believe he was suicidal. All the stuff with the thing. So I don't know, man. It's crazy, but like this guy lived in like a different type of world than you and me, man. He was paranoid, compounds. He like faked reports to the media in real time. Like I watched that part of the documentary was he was with one reporter who was capturing he was with one reporter in Belize. It was like a Vice guy with a camera. And he was also calling a different reporter in Mexico saying that he was captured in Mexico to get the media off his trail. So you're watching him lie to a reporter in Mexico, lying that he was captured, and they're like, and then they report it like an hour later, and then Vice goes like, "No, you're wrong." It's like what? It was craziness. So I have no idea what to believe. I don't think I'll ever know what to believe with John McAfee, but I will know that I will never be updating that freaking antivirus on my computer because they put them in like these computers. They put in McAfee antivirus, and you get like a free month, and then it always says, "Do you want to buy? Do you want to buy it now? Like you got your free month of McAfee. Do you want to buy it now?" And so, no, I don't, John.
I've, yeah, goddamn, John, what are you doing, man? Uh, I do think it's somewhat ironic that the guy who made some of the first like internet security programs in the U.S. also is a guy who's always afraid for his own security. It
Yeah.
seems to me very fitting that he would develop this antivirus software. I do think because he was quoted saying now that if I hang myself a la Epstein, it will be no fault of mine. I think the internet is fixated on Jeffrey Epstein because let's be honest, I mean, I think it's very likely he did not kill himself.
Sure.
So I think now everyone is looking at all of these weird cases
Like
and
Epstein's.
yes.
Yeah.
And John McAfee, like you said, I agree with you. I think he's an egomaniac. I would like to entertain the idea that he had a condo in that collapsed building and that he was avoiding the US extradition. But it's also likely that he realized he was fucked
But
and he
like
ended his life.
he was trying to get extradited to the U.S. for like a cryptocurrency fraud. Like
Right, right.
it's not like he was a terrorist. Like it's not like like I don't know. I feel like he might have got a couple years. It would have been fine. Like you know what I mean? Like he would have gotten a white collar crime slap on the wrist. Couple years, you're chilling. But it's like so. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, the suicide note stuff and his comments that he's like, "I will not kill myself," is definitely sketch. But he was also kind of had a couple screws loose, and I imagine I'm not trying to make light of it. He could have had some mental health problems that we don't understand, right? So the idea that it is suicide is also I think just as likely.
Yeah. And I mean, I just look at it. He kept claiming that if he ever was killed by someone, he would make sure he'd have documents released. I haven't seen any documents yet. And I don't trust the guy. He was an antivirus software guy, yoga expert, lifestyle guru, murderer, cryptocurrency,
Alleged murderer.
alleged murderer, excuse me. But I do know that he set up a curfew in this village that he was in Belize. So he sounds like a guy that would be probably like tough to deal with.
Yeah. I think he's got some pretty legendary Reddit Ask Me Anythings.
I would love to
Um,
get a I would love to get a beer with him, but sadly that's never happening.
um, all right. Well, that should probably wrap it up for today's episode of the Tonic Accord podcast. I don't know why my camera is off. I guess it turned off at some point. Um, but it was on for most of it. I've been keeping track. I think it was in the
It
last
was,
few
yeah.
minutes. But anyway, thank you for watching, folks. This has been the Tonic Accord. We are live on Twitch every Tuesday around 5 p.m. Pacific time. And then you can catch our content on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and a variety of other podcast sites. So check us out there, comment what you think, and catch us next time.